Russia and China, two of the world's leading military powers, have had their share of disagreements in the past, but over time, their relationship has evolved. The war in Ukraine has brought them closer together, and it's becoming increasingly evident that China is supporting Russia more, especially in the military domain. Could the weapons from the sorcerer China help Russia gain the upper hand in this conflict? On May 15th, 2024, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping issued a joint statement on deepening the comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation between the two nations. This was Putin's first official visit after assuming his new term in office, highlighting the importance Russia places on its relationship with China. The 30-page joint statement emphasized mutual security support, criticized the United States, and laid out directions for cooperation in key areas such as defense, economy, energy, and technology. China welcomed Putin with great ceremony, amid Western concerns that this relationship could influence Beijing's stance on international issues, including the war in Ukraine. This statement underscores that Russia and China are determined to stand together in addressing bilateral, regional, and global challenges. Over 400 years ago, when Russia began to form and develop, the relationship between Russia and China had never reached the favorable level it enjoys today. Defining the 4,209 kilometers border between the two nations was a challenging task. In the 17th century, both empires faced each other in the Far East when the first Russian settlers arrived in the sparsely populated area north of the Amur River, known as the Heilongjiang River in Chinese, a region claimed by the Manchu-led Qing dynasty. This is where the border dispute began. For centuries, the relationship between Russia and China experienced many ups and downs, with minor skirmishes occurring before the Treaty of Nerchinsk 1689 was signed to settle peace between the Russian Tsar and the Kangxi Emperor of China. At that time, Russia began to shift its focus more towards Europe rather than the cold Siberian region. In recent decades, China has become Russia's largest trading partner, particularly in the energy and mineral sectors. The war in Ukraine has further strengthened this relationship, as China not only supports Russia but also capitalizes on Western sanctions to enhance cooperation. Tensions in relations between the U.S. and both China and Russia have brought the two nations closer, as a natural way to balance power with the West. When the conflict in Ukraine erupted, the West imposed severe sanctions on Russia, including bans on oil and gas sales, price caps on oil, exclusion from the SWIFT system, and the freezing of Russia's central bank assets. However, China did not follow the West. Instead, it announced that Russia had surpassed Saudi Arabia in the first 2 months of 2023 to become its top oil supplier. In 2022, despite sanctions, Russia remained China's second largest crude oil supplier, with 86.2 million tons of oil transported thanks to intermediary companies. For decades, Russia has been the main supplier of weapons to China. From 2001 to 2010, Moscow sold approximately $2 billion worth of weapons annually to Beijing, with a major contract worth $7 billion signed in 2015. However, the situation has changed. Russia has lost more than 9,400 pieces of military equipment, including over 1,500 tanks in the conflict in Ukraine. Many experts believe Russia is now facing a severe shortage of weapons and ammunition. The United States has also suggested that there is intelligence indicating China is considering providing weapons to Russia. If this happens, it could change the course of the war and lead to a major crisis in relations between China and Europe. Since the early months of the conflict, Russia has repeatedly requested China to supply weapons, but Beijing has only sent non-lethal aid, such as protective helmets and dual-use items like aircraft components. In 2023, German intelligence reported that Russia was negotiating with a Chinese company to purchase 100 attack drones. Moscow has used these drones on the front lines and in attacks on Ukraine's power infrastructure since October 2023. The U.S. is concerned that China might supply Russia with artillery shells, which are considered the most dangerous weapon in the current conflict. Both Russia and Ukraine use 122mm and 152mm artillery shells from the Soviet era, and both sides are seeking supplies from various sources. However, Russia is lacking support from its allies, despite seeking assistance from Belarus and even North Korea, which has provided a limited amount of artillery shells. Iran has too few weapons to support Russia, but China possesses many compatible artillery shells, though there is little information about the scale and quality of its stockpiles. However, what China could supply would be enough to help Russia overcome its growing artillery shell crisis. In a war of attrition like the one in Ukraine, having a dominant artillery firing rate could determine victory or defeat. Although Russia is expected to produce 4.5 million artillery shells in 2024, far surpassing the combined output of 1.3 million by the US and Europe, the production cost of Russia's 152mm shells is only a quarter of that for NATO standard 155mm shells. Despite Russia's significantly increased weapons production, it still falls short of meeting the demands of a prolonged war. Meanwhile, NATO is lagging in artillery shell production, leaving Ukraine facing significant challenges as it relies on Western supplies. On the front lines, each Ukrainian shell must contend with 5 from Russia. China could change this dynamic. As the world's fourth largest arms exporter, with 8 companies in the top 100 and 3 in the top 20, China not only stands to benefit from exporting weapons, but also has the opportunity to rebalance its defense relationship with Russia. After years of importing military technology from Moscow and copying and improving it, China is now in a position to play a key role in supporting Russia in this conflict. From 2017 to 2021, 81% of China's defense imports came from Russia, including engines for stealth fighter jets. Currently, China has the opportunity to become an equal military-industrial partner with Russia. Beijing could help Moscow circumvent Western sanctions by providing high-tech components such as engines for drones, cruise missiles, and precision weapons, rather than just basic equipment. In return, China might seek access to RD-180 technology, a Russian rocket engine used for space launches and possibly ballistic missiles. In the 1990s, America's Lockheed Martin chose the RD-180 as the main engine for the Atlas V rocket, serving military satellite launches. The RD-180 is highly valued for its superior performance and reliability, making it an ideal choice for putting military and NASA satellites into orbit. This Russian rocket technology is difficult to replicate without official transfer. Besides the RD-180, China may also be interested in submarine technology or jet engines from Russia. However, within China, there are mixed opinions about supporting Russia. On one hand, they do not want to see Russia bogged down in the war, especially against Western weapons such as missiles and tanks. On the other hand, China wants to keep any support secret to maintain a neutral facade, avoiding escalations with the US and Europe. Considering military support for Russia not only brings international pressure, but also exposes China to various accusations, especially during United Nations Security Council meetings on the Ukraine conflict. On May 20th, China's representative to the United Nations, Geng Shuang, refuted allegations that Beijing was supplying weapons to Russia in its military campaign in Ukraine. He asserted, "These are baseless accusations and completely unacceptable." Geng Shuang also warned that the Ukraine war is being prolonged by the large quantities of weapons and ammunition supplied to Kyiv by the US and its allies. Meanwhile, Beijing has consistently called for a ceasefire and resolution of the crisis through diplomatic means. He reiterated that China firmly opposes the unilateral sanctions imposed by the US and the EU on Chinese companies conducting transactions with Russia, deeming them illegal. Since the war broke out in February 2022, the US and the West have provided Ukraine with around $200 billion worth of weapons. In response, the West has accused China of supporting the Russian military by exporting dual-use goods and has even threatened to sanction Beijing. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs rejected these accusations, stating that they are meant to distract public opinion, while also emphasizing that blaming others is not the way to resolve the conflict.